Hi and welcome to this information session on Move More, Sit Less. My name is Berry Johnston and I'm an occupational therapist. I run and own Little Peeps Occupational Therapy for Kids. This session is done in collaboration with Fremantle Language Development Centre, where I provide a consultative OT service to teaching staff and families. So, move more, sit less. I think we all agree we need to do more of it. And how do we get to do that? And why is it important for the kids in the classroom? Just for general health and wellbeing as well. So in this session, we're going to outline why is physical activity so important, what's the evidence behind it, and how can we help achieve it? So the programs that could be used, the example at the Fremantle Language Development Centre, and also an example from Harmony Primary School. The evidence. What child development health professionals know is that movement is an important basis for all learning, attention and memory. It is through movement that babies learn and grow. Babies are born with primitive reflexes, but we need to learn to integrate those reflexes through functional movement in order to create an ability to walk, crawl and engage with others. Physical activity improves our motor skills, so you are more likely to engage in physical activity if you have better motor skills. But if you have better motor skills, you're also more likely to be physically active. We know that movement is important throughout the lifespan, so it's important for children to move in order to grow, but also for older people to move to maintain their function and health. This house of OT is my favourite analogy about childhood development, and it's about building a house is like growing and developing as a child. When we build a house as a child, we lay down our sensory systems. They're our foundation of our house before we can go and put those building blocks of our house together, such as gross motor planning, muscle tone, fine motor skills, eye-hand coordination. Finally, we're able to put the roof of our house on, and that's our ability to have self-control, self-esteem. What this tells us is that that foundation level is so important for learning the building blocks of movement, for gross motor skills, crossing the midline, gravitational security. The foundation sensory systems are so important for that, especially proprioception and vestibular input. And we know that it's easiest to put that house on for that child, the roof of the house on for that child, when all those systems come together nicely. So when they're all working smoothly, we know children are more likely to have good self-esteem and good self-control. So this tells us that if a child is having difficulty with motor skills, it may be because of the foundation level. There's something not quite smooth sailing there, but it also can have an impact on the child's ability to bring it all together and become a successful individual. So how and why? Why is movement so important? We know that when you move, you trigger your proprioceptors, and these are sensory receptors located in the muscles and tendon joints of our muscles and joints. When we move our proprioceptors, it triggers a release of chemicals in the brain called serotonin and dopamine, and these are vital neurotransmitters that help switch our body on and keep us activated. They can directly impact our attention, our self-esteem, but also manage our anxiety and worried levels. We also know that this helps because of dynamic blood flow. When our muscles are moving, they're pumping blood throughout the body. When that dynamic blood flow occurs, more oxygen travels throughout our body, so it allows us to keep exchanging the chemicals we need to keep us alert and concentrated. And generally, we know that you need to move it or you lose it. Sometimes if you don't practice a motor skill often enough, you might lose the ability to engage in that motor action. So if you haven't played tennis for a long time, you might be a bit rusty until you get a bit more practice in. The same applies for children. If we're not getting them moving and engaging in the playground, they're going to find it harder to maintain those skills and further develop them. The Australian Government Department of Health indicates that children should have a minimum of 60 minutes of physical activity a day and no more than 2 hours screen time. And this is a minimum, and they suggest that this is the minimum in order to ensure that a child grows and develops good muscle strength and bone density, but also maintains good cardiovascular health, but also maintains positive well-being. The guidelines state 60 minutes of physical activity a day and no more than 2 hours screen time. What the evidence tells us is that at least a third of the children do achieve that 60 minutes a day, and a third of the children meet no more than 2 hours screen time. So what that directly tells us is that 2/3 of children do not meet 60 minutes of physical activity a day, and 2/3 of children have more than 2 hours screen time a day. Now, when you combine those factors of not enough movement and too much screen time, you're creating a very sedentary person, someone who's not engaging in much physical activity or challenging their motor systems. What's interesting is that the same applies for adults. In 2011 to 2012, 60% of Australian adults did less than the previously recommended 30 minutes of physical activity a day. We spent 39 hours a week, which approximately 10 hours of that was at work, and 29 hours of leisure doing sedentary activities. So we did 29 hours a week on average for 60% of the population in sedentary behaviours. The evidence of these physical activity guidelines tells us that more activity is better and that some is better than none. So the minimum of 60 minutes is there, but it's not detrimental if a child needs to do 2 hours of activity in one day. It shows that it has positive physical health benefits, great social benefits, emotional benefits and intellectual benefits, especially for the learning abilities of children. And what it tells us is that with sedentary behaviours, it is associated with poorer health outcomes. Leon Straker from Curtin University refers to sitting as a new epidemic, so it's actually becoming a really significant impact on the health outcomes of Australians. What we know from early motor development is that by around 6 months of age, children should be learning to sit. By 8 to 10 months, they should be crawling, and 12 months, they should be walking. That is the average developmental milestones. But factors that can impact that early stage is tummy time, limiting the use of positioning devices, so not always strapping a child in, limiting screen time, and early detection of impairment. The earlier we can see that a child might be delayed in those motor abilities, the sooner we can provide them with support to actually learn appropriate motor tasks as well. Children, we know, as they grow, if they have poor motor skills, are less likely to participate in physical activity, and that's really a key factor. We want to maintain physical activity throughout the lifespan. So if we can get children being active earlier on in their life, we're more likely to see better health outcomes across the board. We also know that there's a clear relationship with motor skills with the child's social and emotional health, their language ability, as well as their cognitive ability. So hence, the physical education programs of schools are well placed to improve fundamental motor skills. We also know that movement skills and motor skills are highly correlated with self-regulation. The child's ability to self-regulate at 4 is the biggest predictor of their success as an adult. And this success was measured in terms of health, wealth, and mental well-being. So it is not the child's language abilities, intelligence, not motor skills, but self-regulation. But what we do know, if you have difficulties regulating yourself at 4, you're more likely to have difficulty engaging in learning, regulating your emotions, and engaging in negative choices in adolescence. So one way we can actually address this difficulty with self-regulation is to increase physical activity. If you increase your physical activity, you have a greater ability to self-regulate. One example of this was a research program where they looked at measuring 2 groups of students, one with a diagnosis of ADHD and one with no diagnosis. On the initial test, the students without a diagnosis far outperformed the students with ADHD. This test was re-administered, but the second time, all students were required to engage in a 20-minute brisk walk. Following the second administration of the assessment, the students, after the walk, with ADHD far outperformed the students without a diagnosis. So this really tells us that physical activity can have a really significant impact on that child's ability to switch on and concentrate. What we also know that's important about movement is a child's core strength. And if you've been to a gym or a personal trainer, they'll always tell you it's about the core. But generally, development of a child's motor abilities occurs from the core, We always need to have that proximal stability, so control around our pelvis, before we can have distal mobility, so the movement in our fingers. We can improve our core strength by having short bursts more often throughout the day. So not going gung-ho and doing abs for 20 minutes a day, but having short bursts of good quality controlled movement. We can mix it up as well, so we can practice this in the classroom with yoga activities, not just within the physical education program. So how do we ensure that we meet these 60 minutes of physical activity guidelines every day? We can have daily fitness, physical education, brain breaks in the classroom, out-of-school activities, kids participating in footy or gymnastics. Dynamic classrooms can also help with this. The kids playing at lunch and recess, and even just walking to school. Some good programs that are great in the early years of education include Animal Fun. This is a Curtin University resource, which is available at animalfun.com.au. And it's really about teaching those fundamental motor patterns and building up core strength and providing proprioceptive feedback. And Cosmic Yoga is a free program available on YouTube, and it's an excellent way to build motor skills, core strength, but also introduce the element of mindfulness. And of course, there's other programs you might have heard of in the school domain, such as perceptual motor programs, sensory motor programs. But for all of the programs, you need to evaluate the cost and the time factor and the burden that places on the education staff. That's why I like Animal Fun, because it's such a really easy tool to use. It was originally designed to address the early movement skills, but I think it could be used easily up into the year 3 and 4 year groups. This is based on evidence, and it showed that children who participated in the program had significant improvement in their motor skills even 18 months after administration of the program, whereas the children in the control group did not see the same improvement. It is designed to be administered 4 days a week for 30 minutes a day, but it is very flexible in its administration. Cosmic Yoga is another great source for a motor program you could use, and this is great for little brain break activities within the classroom. So an example of what we did at the Fremantle Language Development Centre was having a target for physical activity of 2 to 3 hours per week, whereas the curriculum guidelines state only 2 hours are required. So this is responsibility of the physical education teacher, but also the classroom teachers. We also have a requirement that all classrooms participate in core strength activities every day, and they do simple activities such as the dead ant, shown here, where they curl up and hug their knees and lift their head off the floor, which is great for flexion strength or tummy muscle strength, and also Superman pose here, which is excellent for extension strength, and that's great for breaking up the sedentary sitting postures that a lot of children are starting to do in schools. Harmony Primary School is another school which I've supported, and they have a new business plan from 2017, and one of the key features was health and wellbeing for all. So one of the aspects that we embedded into this health and wellbeing was move more and sit less. That was an aim for our school. And one of their strategies was having a screen-free day. So we know a lot of schools have technology and devices in the classroom, so we were going to commit to a screen-free day and having 60 minutes of movement a day within school, and that includes lunch times and recess. So some resources you might like to access include the Early Motor Screening Resource, Motor Screening Assessment, which is available through Child Development Services and OTs and physios, Community Nurse Health Screenings, Assistance for Dynamic Classroom Designs. Curtin University also run a paediatric physio clinic at Cockburn Central. And also, City of Cockburn have a Better Health program, which is designed for children who are at risk of obesity. So it might be useful to consider what are some of the key features of physical activity in your school. So in school sport, or how do you foster out-of-school sport participation? And how can the classroom teachers play more of a role in meeting these requirements? And how can you support teachers in doing that? So thank you for listening today to this tutorial on Move More, Sit Less. I hope you are inspired to go and get your students moving more. And please feel free to email me with any questions or ideas. Thank you.